Welcome to Performance Intelligence. I'm Angela Poon from the Performance Intelligence team, and today's episode is a special one, and honestly, it's long overdue. We're bringing together our founder, Andrew May, and his longtime collaborator, Dr. Tom Buckley, for a conversation about a concept that's basically shaped everything we do, which is MatchFit. Now, what began as a book idea 6 years ago has since impacted hundreds of thousands of people. From executive boardrooms to elite sporting environments, MatchFit has become the cornerstone of our programs, our coaching, and our online platform, PQ Academy. It's the way we help people show up their best, mentally, physically, and emotionally. But here's the surprising part. We've never actually delivered a podcast to you on the book that started it all. So today, you're getting a rare behind-the-scenes look at the MatchFit journey, where it began, how it's evolved, and why its principles are more relevant than ever in the fast-paced, high-pressure world we live in. And here's a secret for our dedicated listeners. If you stick through the entire episode, we're giving away signed copies of the book, but you need to listen to the end for details on how to enter. So now let's dive in and hear from Andrew and Dr. Tom.
Dr. Tom Buckley, welcome to another podcast. I didn't realise we had not done a discussion around this book.
Yeah, hi Andrew, and it's great to be here. And it's a really good question. Why haven't we done this podcast already?
Yeah, I'm not sure why we didn't. I think maybe because at the time we did so much media. Like we did TV interviews, we did magazine, we did heaps of podcasts as well. So across all print formats, maybe we just thought we'd done it.
We're joined in the studio now by performance coach Andrew May.
Performance coach Andrew May joins us now.
Andrew May, so good to have you back in the studio.
Andrew May is a performance coach to business executives and the sporting elite. And he joins us now. Andrew, welcome.
Andrew May joins us now in the studio. Hey, good segue into congratulations on the book that you have just released, MatchFit, which gives you a complete manual to get your body and mind back into shape.
With a career as a performance coach, Andrew May had to practice what he preached, and he used himself as a guinea pig to turn his life around. And Andrew joins us now. Good morning to you.
I put this book together with Dr. Tom Buckley, and I need to acknowledge Tom. He's Associate Professor at Sydney University, so there's a lot of rigour and science behind this.
So talk us about this calculator. I did it last night, and it's a bit of a survey that you go through.
You are 71 out of 100, so 75 out of 100 is what we call striving. You are so close. There's one area though, Deb Knight, where we're going to focus on.
What's that?
It's called recovery.
So me time.
You time.
Really? You wouldn't have thought it with 3 kids and a couple of jobs on the go?
Yeah, and we've discussed many aspects. A lot of the concepts in the book we've discussed either in podcasts or workshops, and it continues to evolve. And so I'm really pleased that we're doing this today, because I think our evolution on some of the content models, their applications, some of the pragmatics, 5-6 years is a long time. We've definitely evolved in how we operationalize this content.
And before we rip into the discussion, I really do want to take another moment, take a breath, look in the camera for our YouTube watchers and lean really close to the microphone for our podcast listeners. Thank you. The fact that we sold over 100,000 copies blows my mind. Remember when I said this idea? Hey, I reckon if we hit 5,000, which in Australia is bestseller, if we hit 10,000, I think I said I'm going to take you to Las Vegas for a party. So I don't know what 100,000 gets us. You get a leave pass for 2 weeks, or you have to get a leave pass from that. But all jokes aside, I am just overwhelmed by the success that we've had on this book, and it has highlighted the content, right book, right time, right message, and just really resonated with so many people.
Yeah, I think that resonation with people is really important.
Hey, we will go through a deeper dive in the 6 levers, but before we do, there's 2 topics that, in looking back over the book, I wanted to talk about. One was well-being through the decades, and the other one was exposure theory. Well-being through the decades and exposure theory. We'll put this in the show notes. There's a model we've done on well-being through the decades. And when I'm presenting this or talking about this in an audience, we talk about through your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond. I'll just give it a high level you can add. In our 20s, you're like, yeah, whatever, whoever's. Like you hear me up on stage with my shiny head talking about what you need to do in your 20s. In your 20s, you can go out all night for a couple of days in a row and wake up and someone says, Dr. Tom, you're in your 20s. How do you feel? You've had no sleep for 2 days. You go, I feel freaking awesome. You can do what you want and you can still perform in your 20s. And when I do this to an audience, the 20-year-olds laugh. I go, hey, don't laugh too much. It will catch up. All right, who's in their 30s? In our 30s, we get a little bit more of that visceral fat, technical term on this, I call it muffin top. So you start to see those changes. We tend to get into more permanent relationships, lifestyle changes. So then in the 30s, people start to really see some of that shift, especially the physical health. And then the 40s, I say in our 40s, we get high, and you pause and there's a few naughty little laughs or nervous laughs. High visceral fat, high levels of cholesterol, high levels of pressure, and high levels of sometimes dysfunctionality because there's been all work and no play. And then we get into our 50s, we get disease expression, the cardiovascular diseases. We talk about heart disease and diabetes, and we're seeing a lot more mental health issues. Now, that's if you do nothing about it, because we, Dr. Tom and I, believe most people have the capacity to live to 90 or 100 if you are match fit. And getting a head start in your 20s and your 30s will help you roll through the decades. That still resonates. That still lands as much as ever, that notion of rolling through the decades. The only thing I'll add now is start doing this as early as you can, and you're going to get a compound effect or interest throughout the rest of your life. What would you like to add?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think, when it still resonates with me, and we all reflect on ourselves where we're at on that trajectory and journey. 100%. I mean, we know from a medical and a disease perspective that a lot of the seeds are sown very early. We used to think in our 40s and 50s we sowed the seeds to chronic disease. We actually know now it's probably happening in the teenage years for some expression of some diseases. I think there's the physicality of it, the physicality of how we biologically change. The thing I've become really conscious of with that model is that there's a change in our thinking as well, in our psychology that goes along with that I think we do need to probably run parallel with it in that, in your 20s, it is so what, and you can do everything. But actually what your mindset is like then is very different to somebody in their 30s where they may have a family or a partner they're responsible for, maybe they've got little ones responsible in your 40s. And, where your mindset is probably just as important to where your biology is. And I think that very much drove our thinking through MatchFit at the time, but maybe we didn't express that as much in that model that perhaps we could.
Yeah, I find now the level of education has risen as well to what it was 5 years ago. There's a lot more people talking about, looking at Peter Attia, his great work, Andrew Huberman, his podcast. People are more informed, but informed doesn't mean you do it. So I find we're still having the conversation as much, great, that's called self-awareness. Do you do it? That's called self-regulation. And if you know it and you don't do it, just makes you really frustrated because you're not doing what you should do. Hey, let's look at that exposure theory. You first raised my awareness around this. We published it in the book before it had actually come out. US Surgeon General came out 2 years ago and said, dun, 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 for the first time in history, a child born today will not live as long in years as their parent. We'd been adding 2.2 years a decade for over 100 years, with better health, better sanitisation, medication, education, everything that goes with it. Go back and tell us the time where you first looked at, the way we're living. And exposure theory, just a high-level frame for people, it's overload of the sympathetic nervous system, so too much technology, shitty processed food, and not exercising enough.
Yeah, it's the concept that it's a theory, but I think it's bearing out, is that you probably need around 20 years of exposure to what I call toxic behaviors or pathogenic environments, and they're the things you say, not moving, eating rubbish, processed foods, being too wired up, being overexposed to technology, etc. My synthesis of literature a long time led me to think that there's about 20 years of exposure before you start to see expression of that. And if you translate that across through, statistically on relative risk and hazard ratios and all this fancy stuff we do as researchers, to me, you start to see that, and the net result of that would be a reduction in lifespan. Now, we have seen a reduction in lifespan. We certainly saw for a period of time a stall in longevity statistics, and now we're starting to see a slight reduction in them, which was something that we predicted and anticipated. And then, some of the world leaders in this area have been adamant, and I've seen them at scientific conferences constantly say, the expectation that our children will outlive us as a generation, that's not going to happen unless something major happens. And that's what we're seeing. What I do want to add to it, Andrew, today in our discussion is that we are very, very focused on lifespan. And I know you want to live to 130 years. I don't. Well, I would if I had health span with it. And health span is probably way more important. And I think most people would prefer to live to 80 in good health, functional good health, than to live to 130 with the last 50 years in a nursing home.
Yeah, underscore 130 and be healthy. My kids,
exactly.
My son Archie said to me, we'd just been on a holiday in Swansea at time of recording. He said, Dad, do you still want to live to 100 plus? I said, 2 reasons, mate. Absolutely, yes. 1, I need to get you little a-holes through school and education. He just started laughing. I said, 2, why not? If you can be healthy physically and psychologically and connected and making a difference, why not live a whole lot longer? So that hasn't changed. What also hasn't changed is MatchFit. When I first wrote about this, there's 3 different components of MatchFit. Number 1, it's a metric. We had a MatchFit calculator. Number 2, it was a set of levers: move, fuel, recharge, think, connect and play. And 3, it was a way of living. So I still believe MatchFit is a metric. It is a set of levers and it's a way of living. Now, let's get into these 6 levers. I'm going to give us a time limit on this because we had a bit of a joke before. I said, Wizard, this podcast will be roughly 60 minutes. You went, for every minute you clowns talk over a minute, or just say you want $10. So he reckons he's going to have a home line if we go for too long. So can I give each one of these levers 5 minutes? And if we go any longer than 5, I'm going to gong myself. So we'll go through what the lever is, the key model, and then the adaptation. And this has been a really interesting exercise doing this. So the first one was move. That's around physical activity. The key model, plural on this one, is 10,000 steps a day. We still believe you need to get 10,000 steps a day. Dr. Tom will pipe in and go, 12,000. So start at 10 to 12,000 steps a day. Got nothing to do with your fitness, but everything to do with mitochondria and energy. Big tick, that still stands now as much as it did 5 years ago. The second model on this is our Fitness 5. A lot of people talk about the training triangle. You need to do a balance of flexibility, cardiovascular work and strength. And we added 2 more on this, so we made it the Fitness 5. We added balance/mobility and posture. I will still, as I sit up nice and straight, look at those 5 key areas, a foundation to movement and having good energy and feeling strong and having that capacity we talk about that underpins leadership capacity and energy and everything else. So tick to the Fitness 5, flexibility, cardiovascular strength, balance, mobility and posture. The change on this, the update, Tom, has been really influenced by minimum effective dose. Now we are much sharper and much more prescriptive in the dose of what people should do around, especially strength training and the cardiovascular work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the pragmatics here. I mean, we know the science around these. We know the thresholds for optimization of performance, well-being, health, prevention of disease. We know what they are. But once again, a little bit like earlier with the calculator, if people are unable to do that volume, then you are way better doing something than nothing. And so we have tried to work out what the minimum effective dose is. And there's some good literature around that, Andrew. We've talked about it in other podcasts that you get 80% of the benefit of any exercise in the first 20 minutes. So if you only have 20 minutes, you're getting 80%. Well, that's way better than doing nothing and getting 0%. So I think using that principle of where's the threshold that you actually get the sort of minimum most effective dose. And that's underpinned a lot. It's the same with interval training, the same thing here. We know that 6 minutes of high intensity exercise, you've got over 80% of the benefits. So people don't have an hour to do a whole lot of 3-minute reps and stuff. But if they can do a cumulative 6 minutes of higher intensity exercise, you're getting 80% of the benefit that you wouldn't get if you stayed watching Netflix.
So our prescription now around Move is get minimum of 10,000 steps a day, up to 12,000, and you get a little bit more magic. And then from the higher intensity physical activity, we say resistance training for 20 or 30 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, in brackets, lift heavy shit. When it looks at interval training, 6 minutes, 1 to 2 times a week at about 85% of maximum heart rate. And then zone 2, where the magic happens, and you say, get as much of zone 2 as you possibly can.
I think there's two groups here, and you've really been, it's a lot of thought leadership on this. You and I come from this endurance, running, cycling background. We've hung around a lot of friends who have spent their whole life just, it's all about distance. It's all about Strava. It's all about, you can't do enough. But they often are quite weak. They often don't have good strength. Yes, they can cycle a bike faster. Maybe they can run a fast 10K, but they often don't have good overall body strength. And so what you've got there is that they're enhancing one system through their aerobic capacity, which is phenomenally important. But you can't do that at the expense of strength. And so if I look at the literature and I look at, say, longevity or the onset of premature disease, if I look at both of those bodies of literature, you actually can't do too much zone 2 or low intensity exercise. That, the more you do, the more benefit you get. The caveat, there are of course individuals where that may bring musculoskeletal or it may create other problems. The caveat for that is you shouldn't be doing that at the expense of strength. You've got to do both. And you've really influenced me on that. Somebody who can't do enough long distance stuff, is that you still got to push heavy stuff. You've still got to have the strength.
Resistance training, we say, is the fountain of youth, because you do look at a lot of those endurance athletes who are still chasing hundreds and hundreds of miles. And again, I used to be one of them. And if people are doing that and that's your jam, that's fine. However, if you do want to look young and fresh and healthy, I just sometimes think, what are you actually doing? What are you chasing? As you said, minimum effective dose. So for me, running a couple of businesses, working with multiple sporting teams, having 4 kids, I live my life through med. I train so differently now to what I did 10 years ago. And I can tell you this stuff works. It really does work. So that's been the real shift for me, is still looking at that foundation of the Fitness 5, still getting 10. I'm obsessed about 12,000 steps a day, you know that. But then training much smarter based on med. Now I'm looking at the time. Magic for the first lever, we've actually stuck to 5 minutes. So let's go to the next one, fuel. Oh my goodness. When we wrote this, so nutrition, and I hear this every time we do a corporate program. I'm from a Mediterranean, Indian, Chinese, whatever background, and these are my foods, and that's fine. Or my grandmother said, if you have porridge, it sticks to your ribs. Well, Granny had some sort of understanding of this, because porridge, you talk about the processing of blah. It is so complex. So we start by saying nutrition is the most complex out of everything we teach. So we really simplify. So the model, it still stands. Think of your plate with a circle, divide it into half, and then on one of the half, just quarters. So you've got half, quarter, quarter. Half of your plate should come from a plant. 1/4 of your plate will come from protein, and 1/4 of your plate will come from performance carbs. And then the middle of that plate, a little circle, and that is what we call healthy fats. Still stands now as much as it did 5 years ago.
I think it's a good platform and a good starting place for sure. I think, as you said, this is the most contentious area we ever discuss in workshops or in any of our performance programs.
If I don't have 30 to 45 minutes, so if we're doing a half-day masterclass and someone wants nutrition and they've said they want some work on change and the neuroscience of change, and they want some work on role modeling and signs and symbols, and they want some work on mental skills, and can you do nutrition for 10? Nah. If I don't have 30 or 45 minutes, I don't go near it. There's too many beliefs and emotions around nutrition.
Yeah, and people's nutrition choices are very emotively or belief structures behind them. There's no doubt about that. I'm going to add 2 little caveats in there. I think that's a really good platform. I think the first one is it's really important that it's healthy fats, not dirty fats. So that's really, really important. And I don't think
olive oil, avocado, nuts.
Yeah, oily fish, grass-fed meat, free-range chicken. So I think there's the macro content on the plate, and I think having good healthy fats, natural proteins, and as much vegetables as you can, that will get you there. The principle to wrap around that is that if it all came out of packages, you haven't met that principle. So if it's coming out of packaged foods, that's where you're getting your carbs, and that's where you get your protein. That's anywhere your plants, that are being processed. That's a big problem, because we know the effect of processed foods is absolutely detrimental to our health. So you may get energy from them, but you're getting a lot of other things in there. So I think just to put that caveat, the area where I think I've evolved a lot in this space is, and we've done a podcast on it recently, is there's calories, but there's also what's in the food and its effect on the gut. And I think the science has been there for some time, and really good nutritionalists have been talking about this, but it hasn't been clear about what you can do about it in a sort of general pragmatic way. And so I think now we know a lot more about gut health, and gut health, not just for our physical health, but for our mental well-being, and that connection between the brain and the gut is super strong through the vagus nerve. So I think we've evolved in that you've got to get that balance right, but you have got to get the right nutrients into the gut. And the stat, we talked about this in our podcast, Andrew, the stat that blows me away is that we've got more microbes in our body than we do cells with a nucleus. So if we're not feeding those guys properly, then, significant proportion of our body is unhappy. Well, no wonder our health and mental health and physical health deteriorates.
And we spoke about it in the podcast as well. So that's podcast episode number 131. And in that podcast, Dr. Tom, if you remember, we had a podcast about a guy I went to school with, Dino. He was a fun guy.
I do remember that conversation. You just traumatized me again.
I got the same response. Tom was talking about fungi and I just traumatized him. Hey, so the 3 updates I had on fuel, 1 was gut health. Go listen to the podcast on that. 2 was intermittent fasting. There's also a podcast on that. And the 3rd one is, especially now that we're working with more executive teams, a lot more around alcohol and how it, sorry, ladies and gents, how it impairs performance, especially past 40. If I've got a really big week and I have to perform multiple performance moments, I just won't drink during the week. There's fuel, and we're on time. Again, 5 minutes. We're going to have to do this for every future podcast. Let's go recharge.
Yeah, so I want to throw this on you because I think you've really evolved in this. And, I can throw all the science on you around sleep and recovery and hormones and its effect on physical health, well-being. But once again, the tools you need to do that, some people feel is beyond them. So I know you've really evolved with the models on this. Did you want to talk a little bit about your recovery rocket?
Yeah, really interesting timing, because on the weekend just past, I did a session, I don't think I told you this, with the Wallabies coaches and support staff before we go into 15 test matches in 4.5 months, 9 countries, I think 14 different time zones. So you know this with your work in exercise physiology and medicine. That's a physiological experiment, just trying to totally stuff up the body. And I said to Joe Schmidt, head coach, I think we really should do something for our coaches and support staff. And Joe said, yeah, that's a really good idea. We need to practice this ourselves. And I taught the model. Now, there's a slight adaptation on it. So the model, we'll put this in the show notes as well. If you think about a rocket, like about to take off, and there's 5 parts of it, the top part is 1 off-season, so that's 1 proper holiday, 3 mini breaks, 30 weeks of the year where you get recovery points. I'll come back to that. 300 mornings where you wake up feeling refreshed. That allows you 1 day a week to not have a great sleep and don't get anxious or stressed about it. And then 365 days in the book MatchFit, I spoke about hapa, which is the Kenyan word for slowly. So where has this evolved? Massively in the 30 weeks of the year for the 100 points, and also in the daily or the micro recovery. Now, on the weekly recovery points, I divide that into physical and psychological. We did a recent podcast with Professor Shona Halson. Shona set up the Recovery Centre at the AIS. She's a global leader in recovery. And even with Shona, and I put this model, she said, I really like the recovery rocket. That has stood the test of time. But all the activities, challenges, or most of them that I had back then, were very physical skewed. And then we spoke about psychological detachment. But a lot of people are going, what does that actually mean? So now we've divided that into physical recovery, which is the traditional recovery modalities. You got massage, contrast therapy, so sleep napping, but the psychological work, and this is what Shona said, this is the area, this is the new frontier. So those people that work in high performance, in military, defense, sport, all these different domains that really tap into psychological recovery, that's where you're going to be pushing the edge. So that's some of the work I'm trying to do with teams that I'm working with. So that's been one big change, is that evolution of recovery is physical and also psychological. I had one of my footballers a couple of weeks ago say to me, do you reckon with the whole mental skills that I should dial it up and dial it back? So effectively he was asking me, do you think I should periodise this? And I went, and I had one of those wake-up moments going, when I was a performance manager for multiple sports, you don't do the same training all year round. So I've just started to add that as well, a periodisation of mental skills training. And because this player said to me, mate, I've been doing all the stuff you told me, but my energy levels just feel fucking horrible. And as he got towards the end of his rugby season, he said, I was doing the mindfulness, I was trying to do imagery. This is all fairly cognitively demanding. And he said, I felt like I was ticking the box. I said, if you run a barometer over you, what were your energy levels? He said, a 2 out of 10. Mate, we need to periodise this. What do you mean? I said, those times where you feel tired and fatigued, just get out in nature, do some grounding, go for a walk on the beach, just do something, go for a surf. So that's been a real learning for me, is when you look at recovery, really adding the psychological or the mental recovery, but also periodising that through the year. And that's something I'm going to be doing a lot more on. Think, the chapter on think, this is the one where I think the evolution has been most pronounced. If I look at what I teach now around the brain, what I teach around mental skills, it's totally different. In fact, when I opened the chapter on think, I looked at it and went, not that this is foreign to me, but I hardly teach any of this anymore. So I think that's where I was in the evolution for me, working out how to teach. The brain is an organ that you can work with to perform under pressure. But back then I was more teaching about here's the brain and what it does. The key model that we had on this was around conceptualizing stress. I think that's really important. But what's changed massively, and I just need to thank the wonderful coaches and athletes and sporting associations I've had the opportunity to work with the past 5 years, that has totally evolved my understanding around this. I now teach there's 12 essential mental skills. So if you think of a model, there's 3 down the bottom. We call these the base level mental skills. That is self-awareness, self-talk, and energy management. So self-awareness is who are you? How do you belong in this world? How do you show up to other people? Or what's the experience of other people? That metacognition, that self-talk thinking. We have 65 to 70,000 thoughts a day. The default, that bad far outweighs good. Some of that research by Roy Baumeister. So that's been a big shift, Tom, teaching people, hey, default number 1, you can have 10 events in a day, 9 go well, 1 goes bad. What do we focus on? The bad one, because that's an evolution mechanism. It's a survival mechanism, but we haven't had the iOS upgrade. You say that to athletes or say that to leaders in any team, they go, so there's nothing wrong with me? No, that's just the default of your brain. And default number 2 is FOPO, a fear of other people's opinion. Now, if you don't know this and how to override it, you can waste so much energy just circling around and around and around like an aeroplane trying to get a runway to land on, but it never gets clearance. And the basics of energy management is what we've spoken about: move, fuel, recharge. So that's the base level of mental skills. And then we get into that mid-range level, it's state management. I do a lot on mindfulness, and I'm loving the learning, the evolution on that. We look at being calm as a mental skill, and breath work. You can breathe to add fire and heat, or you can breathe to calm down and chill. So that's that mid-range. And then we get up into the higher level, the third range, more the performance psychology, the traditional skills like pre-performance routines, focus. There we have confidence. We look at imagery, mental imagery, drive and optimism. And those skills come into play once you've got the base, once you know how to shift state, then you can do the higher level mental skills to really help you perform when it matters most, consistently.
Yeah, I know. I love that model. I think it really, really resonates, and I've seen you present that many times, and the amount of cameras that come out and take photographs of the screen, because I think it really, really resonates with people.
So just on that, on cameras, it's so interesting you say that, because when I was reflecting on this at the start, when we were talking about rolling through the decades and we're talking about exposure theory, cameras come out. That's probably a really good way moving forward to look at how does your message stick or resonate? When do the cameras come out?
I imagine for pop and rock stars on stage, they're watching to see if people are got the cameras out to see if they're connecting or people, but I see this in lectures at uni, and I see this at presentations, and I'm setting a lot of your presentations. And I know when I present, I am keeping an eye out to see if pictures been taken. If you do, you're resonating, you're giving something that people want to take away and think more about. That model really, really works. I think there's two elements I might add in here from my perspective. I think one, and you changed me on this, the sort of conceptualization of stress. I spent years studying the impact of stress on the body and still do, particularly from a cardiovascular prevention. But stress itself, I think we have to think about it as a sort of not just a single thing. If the perception of stress is negative, if the perception of stress is that it's doing you damage, if it's distress, then it almost certainly is. And that's certainly what I see in my research and in others' research that do the type of work I do. But there's the other stress I've reflected a lot on as an athlete and as somebody who is very goal orientated in my professional life as well, is that you do need stress to perform, and that eustress that we talk about is actually essential to performance. You cannot tell me that the 100-meter Olympian was not feeling a degree of stress on the start line. If they were totally chilled out, relaxed, they were never going to win the Olympics. So I think, I've heard you say it many times, and I believe it too, is that stress is good, but you have to be able to understand what it is. Why are you stressful? Are you using it, or are you distressed? And of course, you have got to be able to downregulate and recover afterwards.
Stress is freaking awesome, as long as you add strategic recovery. And that's where these levers have really evolved. They don't sit in isolation. They are a multiplier effect.
Yeah, totally. And I can foul of the stress is bad because I spend my academic career studying it. And continuous exposure to stress and a perception of negative stress and a perception of damaging stress, it will do you harm if you are not able to pull the recovery lever. And so I think there's a difference between bringing your body up to perform, as your footballers and boxers and all these elite athletes you work with, that they need to be able to switch on the stress system to prepare the body to do extraordinary things. That's physiological. That's very different to the perception of being distressed.
And that dance between the two that I now call pulsing. So ramp up, stress is freaking awesome. Ramp down regulation, as long as you add strategic recovery. The only other thing I will add on think is, in teaching this now, I've tapped into, when I was a exercise physiologist, physical performance manager, you take your athletes, men and women, into the gym to do reps and sets, and they get strong, powerful, fast, fit. You do exactly the same for the brain. You've got to do the mental skills reps and sets. So we say you've got to front load these cognitive skills in a non-pressurized environment. So you've got to do them outside of the exam, the presentation, the match, the high-stress situation. Some of the people you and I work with in combat, in defence, you practice all this stuff months and months early, so then you can pull them out of your pocket when you need them most. So that's been a real learning, and it's that interplay, as you said, between the levers. All right, let's get on to connect. We wrote about connection on 3 levels. The core model holds as strong now as ever. You connect with yourself around self-awareness, but purpose. What is your purpose? You connect with others. That's about relationships. And you connect with a community. So that's having a bigger impact on a larger scale. So if you can think of a circle, it's like a smaller circle is you and your purpose. Then it's how you connect with others. And then it's how you connect with the outside world or your community. That holds true as much as it ever did. And in fact, how much did we rely on this research when we lost over 90% of our business. It's almost like a distant memory now in COVID. But thank God, mate, we'd written this book, because when the business world literally dried up, I can remember being at Giroa, and it was in February, and Morrison, who was the Prime Minister at this time, said, we're going to work from home. I was literally looking at my diary and I saw 7 bookings dissipate straight away. I thought, fuck, this is going to be bad. And we limped along for a while now. Presentations were horrible, Wizard, weren't they? Those first few online presentations, and we evolved. But thank goodness, Dr. Tom, we had MatchFit as a book, and we just went to it, didn't we? What did we say around connection? And we got the content there because we did such a deep dive. Wasn't an overnight ChatGPT. I'll come back to that. Right, this was the iteration, the evolution of 25 years of your experience plus mine, so 50 years plus, and was deep and based in research and robust and practical. And it was a godsend for us during COVID.
Yeah, there's so many lessons we got from that period in our lives, those of us that have really were impacted. And I think one of the things that keeps people going is very, very much the sort of staying on purpose, being conscious of others around and the support and companionship and community. And all of those were challenged there for 2 years, very challenged. And we have seen the effect of that on individuals. If there was ever a deep understanding of how important connection is to us as human beings, it was really magnified during COVID. And we knew that, we just completely took it for granted.
The updates on Connect, from a personal level, I've done a much deeper dive on purpose. And the research is just overwhelming. People with a clearly articulated purpose live longer, are more resilient, and make more money. If you want to do any of those, why would you not want a clearly articulated personal purpose? And we know a clearly articulated personal purpose. The research shows this as well. It needs to have 3 components. It needs to be future focused. It needs to excite the living daylights out of you, and it needs to be more than just you. I did some great coaching with Richard Burton. I still get an update with Richard every year or so, because I think your purpose, borrowing Birdo's phrase, is like a jacket you put on, and every now and then you're going to need it nicked and tailored. So I've done a lot on purpose, a lot of coaching on this. Also how purpose plays out, connecting that with vision, with values, and on a mission, which is a current timeline, specific goal you're on. So I now coach around having a clear 1-page plan. I use this for myself. It is so empowering, and purpose is the center of all of that. The other bit we've added on this is social contagion theory. So we know that there's mirror neurons in the front of our cerebral cortex. How you show up is how they show up. Example, Tom, you go home. If you've come from some of the wonderful work you do in research or the education work or teaching, and you drive home, you're on phone meetings like I am, you walk in the door to Nat and the kids, and you're still in work mode. Half an hour later, everyone's arguing, no one's listening. What's wrong with you? I've been working so hard. And then you grab a glimpse in the mirror, you're laughing, you know where I'm going. You go, hey, guys, I know the problem. It's me, because I've shown up agitated, stressed out, anxious, shitty. So everyone starts to be like that. That's a huge part of connection. I teach all the coaches that I work with social contagion theory. I teach all the leaders I work with. What that does is they go, so knowing how to downregulate, knowing how to change the way I think, dramatically impacts the way I connect with other people and lead. That's been a real growth and a real shift.
Yeah, and I think, we did a lot of work during and after COVID on burnout, and we did a lot of work on what is burnout, and of course the real realization that recovery is a really, really good buffer for burnout. But what really, really resonated with me is just how contagious it can be when people are experiencing degrees of burnout, and how the social circles around you and the connection, just how important that is. First of all, as a buffer to burnout, but also when people get really cynical when they're feeling burned out, how that becomes so contagious. And so this connection and the positivity of connection, we're just going to be really conscious too of who we're connecting with. And I don't know if it's a theory or if it's fact, but we often hear people say that you're a reflection of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think, that whether it's a cause or a correlation, or you choose those people because they reflect you, I'm never too sure. But I do think we have to be very aware to make sure that those connections are healthy, they're positive.
I've looked into the history of that quote. It started with an American pop psychology motivation speaker. I think we can now add science to it, because you think about those 5 people you spend with, and so many relationship experts talk about your partner. Who's the significant other that you're going to spend more time with than anybody else in this life? Choose accordingly. Don't choose yourself. God, that'd be horrible. Just a carbon copy of you. But making sure that relationship is good. Not perfect, there never is, but good is so important. Let's get on to the 6th lever, play. Now, before we do, I can remember when I said to you, hey, Tom, I've got a 6th lever to add, play. It's exactly what I got. Silence. And a stare. You idiot.
You keep bringing this up. As a scientist, because remember when we were running MatchFit, I was very much being evidence informed. And so, initially I was, a little silent.
5-year update, ladies and gentlemen. Now, when we were with one of our senior leadership groups, I won't say the group, and this is the end of 6 months. We're at the yacht club recently, looking at how the other half live. You know the workshop I'm talking about?
I do.
And you're there waxing lyrical about you got to have play and fun. I'm up the back of the room. I felt like saying, heretic! Look, winding you up. I just knew intuitively that there was a lot in this. Credit to you. You found the research and you've evolved, and you totally teach this now on a daily basis.
Let's reflect on that. I think actually, as somebody who has always engaged in hobbies and fun and play and has always prioritized it, I took it for granted everybody else did. And I think at different phases of our life, the fun and the play can turn to seriousness and stress and worry and responsibility and career and all. And we just forget. And perhaps for me, I've been very conscious of it, how important that is and how I won't give up those things. But actually, for a lot of people, we do forget, and we do. And when you look at the science of it, and when you look at the relationships in the literature around play and play activities and mental well-being and mental outcome and relationship status and even longevity, it makes complete sense. I just think at the time, I just took it for granted.
I think you had an unconscious competence. And it's the first time I've ever heard you say that you didn't realize that everybody else wasn't like you. So it's good awareness that you've caught up with it. I think that was the disconnect. And I'm like this with my teaching sometimes. On physical activity was one. I often run it by Ange because I don't know what normal is, because I know my behaviour and your behaviour, Dr. Tom, around fitness is not normal. All work and no play will make Jack or Jill a very dull boy or a dull girl. Now, the key model that we used in play came from Dr. Stuart Brown. He was a psychologist who'd been working for decades as a clinical psychologist in his 80s. In his 80s, he actually started to research and looked at play deprivation was very similar to sleep deprivation. So our audience, if I ask you, what do you have the feelings or what is it like to be sleep deprived? You're irritable, you have poor short-term memory, you feel cranky, you eat shitty food, you don't have as much resistance or as much willpower, you're short, sharp with your communication, fragmented. Play deprivation is almost mirror of that. Stuart Brown looked at, we have this whole society of adults that go from kids, and kids love play dates, play dough, play school, play time, and we have play lunch. I look at my little Millie and Sophia, and then we go through school, and then we go to work, and what do, Dr. Tom? What do people do? Meetings. 1 hour, because that's what Bill Gates invented with Microsoft Outlook. So he really captured that whole notion of play deprivation. And then we added in time, what I've added a few updates on this was vitamin FLPJ. You've got to make sure you have a little bit of fun, laughter, play and joy, ideally on a daily basis. And I now see so much more information, books, content out there about play. It's like the whole world has caught up, that we've had play deprivation for so long. We need to embrace play.
I think COVID also, the sort of pandemic has also brought many people consciousness around this, because you know, a lot of our routines and particularly work and life situation changed. And so, you saw this yourself, Andrew, like you could barely buy a chain for a bicycle, let alone buy a bicycle there for a period of time. And that, I think people really did turn to hobbies, to sport, to fun, to play, spending time with the kids, riding bikes with the kids, to the things that people could do. I find it stunning that the complete opposite has happened now. It's almost like people have got an amnesic effect of what that was like. And there is this phenomena that we talk a lot about in social science and health science around how the return to the mean phenomena, that people's behaviors tend to return back to their base, to their mean of what they normally are, their physiology. You prime it up by doing something and then it returns back to the mean once you take your eye off the ball. And I think that's actually what happened to many people. But there are some people where I think it was massively impactful and have really continued to embrace that philosophy of play and the things that give them pleasure and can see the benefit.
I'm going to ask you to summarise, this is challenging, in 1 or 2 points. What were your key learnings, or what do you do differently as a result of us writing, putting the research on the book, but teaching it for the past 5 years? What's 1 or 2 key areas?
I think there were a lot of learnings because we researched to the depths. So I think I could go through every lever and give you 5, 6 key learnings. What have I done differently? I absolutely do resistance training. And that was something I didn't used to do. And I think when you look at the science of why you should, it's such a no-brainer. So I think that is one. I think one of the things that I really, really evolved, and it's come out of MatchFit, because I still go back to that book all the time, and reflect on the chapters, is this concept of pre-recharge or preloading recharge. We didn't talk about it there with recharge, but it's something you probably hear me say a lot. Absolutely, what I learn in MatchFit is that recharge is everything. And I always took it for granted. But when I reflect back on particularly my athletic career, I think some of the underperformance was lack of recovery. And that wasn't always easy when you were working shifts. That wasn't easy when you were surrounded by friends who were probably borderline alcoholics. It wasn't easy when you weren't making the right food choices. But when I do reflect back on it, I think recharge is so, so important. I think if people got that right and they woke up every day feeling refreshed, I think their behaviors in the day and their perception of the day would be very different. So they're probably the 2 things. One, you've said it before, lift heavy SHIT. And the second one for me is the importance of recharge and the concept of recharging before you fill the cup before you empty it. Whereas I think a lot of us try to recover after. I now try to preload the recovery before, so that then the recovery after is easier. And a great example of that is anybody who needs to put in big hours to finish a project or do anything. If you upload the recovery, preload your recovery before, if you're going home at midnight, it's not going to have the same effect on you as if you started that day tired.
A very, very similar learning, one of mine. I now call it surge capacity. There's times in life where you need to surge. So the example I gave with the Wallabies before, you've got to surge. But what underpins that ability to surge, and for me, it's 3 times a year at least. It's February, May, October, where it's keynote season. And I'm delivering a lot, traveling a lot, still got to run a business. But I'm just realistic. In that period, I've got to deliver, recover. But having that platform, so the physical base, the VO2 max, the heart rate, all the metrics, that's another area we've changed quite a lot we didn't discuss, is the wearable tech. But we've got a whole podcast on that. But yeah, for me, the big learnings out of it is move, fuel, recharge, think, connect and play allows our clients to surge at times during the year and go to a whole different level and then drop off the surge and not fall in a heap physically, psychologically or emotionally. It's pretty well carry on life as normal. 2, my second learning, I had no idea, hand on my heart, that this book would have the impact it's had and the sales that it's had. We just connected with people in a way I'm blown away by, still blown away. And then even as we talk about it today, it's core principles. You've got to move, fuel, recharge, think, connect and play. You've got to know where you are have a metric. You've got to understand some of the pathways on longevity and performance. But then it's no use knowing this if you don't do it. You've got to have self-awareness and you've got to have self-regulation. So they're the two big learnings on my end.
And I think just to add to that, what you're talking about there is the concept of physiological capacity, and if you have the capacity to absorb the activity, whether physical, psychological, mental environment, if you have that capacity, but you have to develop that, because if your platform is pretty shallow to start with, you'll have a lot less capacity. I think these levers, and why we could have put another 5 levers in this book. I think why these levers are so important is that it's a waste of time doing other stuff if you haven't got these in place. And so when people are down the health food shop and they're taking supplement X or supplement Y, and then they're going away and they're drowning it down with a beer or a bottle of wine and watching TV, and they're walking 4,000 steps a day and stuff. What a waste of money on that supplement. And so this is essential. Once you got this right, then we can start to look at accelerants.
The core building block. So once you've got this right, great segue into our final point. What's next?
Now, Andrew, I'm going to do something I didn't tell you when we were preparing for this. The listeners would always know that we have a template to work off when you do a podcast, and I didn't tell you this, but I want to flip it around a little bit, because I really, really want you to reflect, or I'd like to ask you to reflect on the backstory. I think when I think of you 6 years ago, and I think of you now as a father, as a partner, as a businessman, as an expert in that you are, I just want you to think about, you asked why haven't we done the podcast, but why did we write the book? And what's your reflection? What's your reflection since of you? Because the power of this book is the backstory that people really do resonate with.
Gee, I'm proud of you. You've really shifted from being a podcast guest to now being a podcast host. Good question. In reflecting on this, we talk about in psychology to come up with new mental models, and to make meaning you need time, but you also need to invest time and some thought process. So this has really helped me catch up with a few things. Why did I originally write the book? I got to 40 and went through a marriage breakdown, and I'd been living this life. It was very external, extrinsic, exogenous, all about external, trying to impress people that I probably didn't like, half of them. I just really got caught up. Is it low self-esteem? Was it because I was such a performer? Combination of the two. I think I just transitioned from the track into the business world without shifting. And I shifted spikes and an athletic track to business and spreadsheets and accolades. And I hadn't really reflected anything about purpose or meaning or what it is that I'm doing. So I hit a massive, massive crisis point in my life. 2 young kids at the time, 40, looked successful, then went through a marriage breakdown. And I'd never really been through a lot of setback, Tom. I'd had cancer, which some people go, well, that's setback. But I was very dichotomous, very black or white. I'm either going to beat it or I'm not, and I beat it, so I shifted forward. And then I had to really dig deep and look at meaning and loss and scar tissue and healing. And I could go for a long time on this, but I'll give it some bullet points. What I realised is going through adversity and hardship, it can actually be a massive strength. I am a much more connected father, friend, partner, entrepreneur, mental skills coach, podcaster, because of what I've went through. Whereas before, I think I'd talk about hardship and I'd go to textbooks and to models. Now I can actually go to real feeling. So I originally wrote it. It was a form of therapy. And interesting, you say you've noticed a number of changes. I think if I wrote that book, or if we wrote that book now, there'd be a lot less topless pictures of myself. I don't know how many friends, even CEOs from large top 25, top 30 ASX companies, you know them. They take the piss out of, there's quite a lot of photos of me in there with my top off. I don't think I'd put as many of those in now at all. But yeah, the real shift for me is I originally wrote that book. It was a form of therapy. It's now a hell of a lot more than that. And even on the platform or stage, when I'm talking about MatchFit, I don't talk about the evolution or the history of MatchFit. I just get into it. MatchFit is a metric. It's 6 levers. It's a way of living. So even you ask me that question, it's evolved a hell of a lot. And I'm really proud of the IP and the content that we've created that 5 years later is as strong as ever. So it's shifted from a really tough, traumatic time in my life to now the principles, the content, they are real core principles. They are life-lasting principles.
Yeah, I've noticed that in workshops where you don't dwell on the backstory as much, and I'm kind of pleased you don't, because I think shifting back into what the sort of research world that I work in is that we know that you can keep re-traumatizing yourself by revisiting the story, and the story gets bigger and the experience gets more intense. And so I think it's a good example how you learned from it, used it, and used it as motivation. I think one of the other reasons I've been told by a very close friend of mine who recently had a big revelation in their life is that, you and I are of age where 50% of marriages break down around our age. And so a lot of people resonate with the change in their life when that happens. But also a lot of people too also often really only fully discover themselves and their purpose and really become comfortable with who they are and what they want to be. And so I think that resonates with people when you go through either marriage breakdown. And for other people, it might be revealing their gender identity, or it might be revealing their sexuality to others. So I think people resonate with your story because it was a time in your life where massive change. And, I know you did a lot of work on meaning and purpose. And I think that really is threaded the whole way through the book.
Well, that really led to the evolution of the 6 levers we talk about: move, fuel, recharge, think, connect and play.
Yeah.
I had to move differently. I had to fuel my body differently. I had to change my thinking and do an iOS upgrade. I really had to look at the recovery piece. I was running on vaporware thinking I could just outrun, outswim, out-kayak, a bad diet, a couple of nights out a week. I also had to really look at that connection, not just with, as you say, purpose, but with others and a bigger purpose, and added play. You could pull out each of those levers alone. You could have a book on move, a book on fuel, a book on recharge, a book on thinking, which is one of the ones I'm looking at Inside Job, a book on connection and a book on play. So much content.
I've really enjoyed doing this because I've really enjoyed reflecting on the journey of writing the book, which what was an intense period. I reflect on the fact that I think this still resonates is because it works. The science confirms the content. It works. We can evolve in the areas a bit more, and I think we've evolved in our practical application of it and teaching of it. But the book still works, and I do think it's time to update it. I think your narrative at the beginning of this podcast has changed, and I think the reason for MatchFit 2 is different, but the content is still very, very relevant.
MatchFit is a metric. MatchFit is 6 levers. MatchFit is a way of living. That hasn't changed. Gosh, he's almost talked me into existence, ladies and gents, of doing an update. Let's get a few things landed in this next couple of months and come back to it. I think whatever it would be easier than the first one. Gosh, it was a lot of lifting. We will never have a project that is as much work and as laborious. And a lot of that was me because I laboured over it and I had so many darlings that we had to kill. And it was a really interesting process. A process that I'm so glad we did. And I'm really glad that we did this reflection today. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your continuing involvement on the podcast and across the business. And let me get back to you with a time when we can dive deep, and I'll try and get permission of fans and family members and everyone to do 2.0. But at some stage, you're right. It's not a total rewrite. It's an update just to keep it fresh.
It's been a pleasure chatting today. Great reflections. Thank you for having me.
So you've now made it to the end of the podcast. Now, as promised, we're running a special giveaway for this episode. We're giving away 3 signed copies of MatchFit. Now, to enter, you need to do 2 things. One is to leave a review for the podcast on the app you're listening to right now. Number 2, head over to Andrew May's latest post on LinkedIn or Instagram and comment a sentence using the secret word fuel. From there, we'll select and contact and announce the 3 winners by Wednesday, the 6th of August. We'll also add the details for you in the show notes. Thank you for listening and good luck.